He wasn't just a member of the Comanchero gang. He was its architect in New Zealand. A man who turned chaos into control, who imposed silence not through fear, but through a system so perfect, even police didn't know his name. But what happens when the perfect system has one fatal flaw? Every kilo of drugs that moved came with a $5,000 cut. Every member trained with military precision. Every rule enforced like law. He didn't carry out violence. He gave the orders that made it inevitable. For nearly 2 decades, his name stayed off headlines. No mugshots, no soundbites, no digital footprints. Just encrypted messages, burner phones, and luxury assets hidden behind shell companies. He operated like a CEO of death. But one intercepted shipment would expose everything. April 8, 2025, a quiet street in Howick, East Auckland. Police moved in with surgical precision. Inside that house was the last free Comanchero leader in New Zealand, the man who built a syndicate so invisible that even his arrest wouldn't make headlines. His name was never released. Not by the courts, not by the police, not even by those who feared him. But within New Zealand's underworld, he wasn't just a ghost. He was the strategist behind the shadows. So how do you catch a man who doesn't exist on paper? Based in Howick, East Auckland, he lived like a suburban dad, but moved like a phantom. No club tattoos, no roaring Harley, no gang photos. He didn't operate like a soldier. He operated like a puppet master, orchestrating logistics, laundering millions, negotiating bulk shipments of meth and cocaine, all while remaining completely invisible. Here's what makes this terrifying. Even veteran investigators admit they'd never heard his name until months before the arrest. He stayed hidden by design. No paper trails, no phone numbers in seized contacts, no public affiliations. Yet his financial footprint was massive. Police traced his links to seizures worth tens of millions, encrypted message patterns that crossed oceans, bank accounts that activated only when ships crossed international waters. It wasn't random, it was methodical, it was genius. But how did a suburban ghost become New Zealand's most dangerous criminal? The story begins with Australia's biggest mistake. In 2015, Australia passed Section 501, a law designed to deport foreign-born criminals. On paper, it looked clean. Commit crimes, lose your visa, go home. What actually happened was Australia exported its most dangerous weapon. Over 3,000 hardened criminals were dumped on countries like New Zealand. And buried in that wave was Pasalika Naufahu, the Comanchero sergeant-at-arms from Sydney. He didn't arrive quietly. He arrived with a blueprint for war. While most saw New Zealand as a fresh start, Naufahu saw something else: unclaimed territory. By 2018, he'd done what law enforcement feared most: launched the New Zealand chapter of the Comancheros. But this wasn't just gang expansion. This was corporate franchising with military discipline. And watching from the shadows was his future successor. Learning every move, perfecting every system. When the Comancheros landed in New Zealand, they didn't just form a gang, they built a machine. Every transaction had a price: $5,000 to the club for every kilo moved. No exceptions, no negotiations. It was a criminal tax that funded everything. But these weren't your typical gang dues. That money bought military trainers from overseas, assault rifles and tactical gear, combat drills that turned bikers into soldiers. Members underwent formations training, practiced tactical takedowns, prepared for war, not bar fights. They weren't building a motorcycle club. They were building a paramilitary corporation. And directing it all from the shadows was a man who understood something other gang leaders missed. True power is invisible power. By 2019, the whispers had become screams. Law enforcement launched Operation Nova, the largest gang takedown in New Zealand's modern history. Multiple properties raided simultaneously. $3.7 million in assets seized. Supercars, weapons, and cash stacked like inventory. President Naufahu, arrested. Key lieutenants taken down. The syndicate seemingly shattered. Most gangs would collapse. But the Comancheros had been built for this exact moment. Because while everyone focused on the loud leaders getting arrested, the real architect was already taking control. And he'd learned from every mistake. By 2024, something impossible was happening. The Comancheros weren't just surviving, they were expanding. Their new target, Christchurch, a city rebuilding after earthquakes, now being quietly infiltrated by criminal soldiers. Leading the expansion was Jerome Fonua, the secretary, but he was following orders from someone else, someone who'd perfected the Auckland playbook. The expansion was surgical. Militarized ranks? Check. Commission structures? Check. Encrypted communications? Check. Complete invisibility? Check. It took law enforcement months to even confirm the chapter existed. That's when Operation Avon struck. August 29, 2024. 18 arrests in a single day. Every patched member taken down. The entire Christchurch operation erased overnight. But once again, the real power remained untouched. Still hidden. Still in control. November 30, 2024. Brisbane, Australia. Federal agents seized 2.34 tons of uncut cocaine. Street value, $760 million. But this seizure revealed something terrifying. The cocaine came from a mothership in international waters. Military-grade smuggling with corporate precision. And the encrypted communications traced back to a familiar pattern. The same behavioral fingerprints seen in New Zealand. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordination. Someone in New Zealand wasn't just watching the Australian operations. They were directing them. If New Zealand had a drug highway, it ran through the port of Taronga. Between 2020 and 2024, over 11,000 kilograms of drugs intercepted. But beneath those seizures, investigators found something chilling. These weren't random smuggling attempts. They were systematic tests. Identical entry stamps, duplicate shell company invoices, shipments timed to customs shift changes. December 2024. Another methamphetamine seizure. February 2025. Cocaine shipment intercepted. Same routing logic. Same false documentation. Same phantom controller. Digital forensics traced the command signals back to Howick, East Auckland. To a suburban house. To a man who'd never left a fingerprint on a single manifest. The ghost was about to become visible. April 8, 2025. Before sunrise, tactical units surrounded the Howick property. The house looked ordinary. Manicured hedges, modest frontage, no visible security. Inside sat the most elusive figure in New Zealand's criminal history. They didn't knock. The takedown lasted 45 seconds. No shootout, no chase, no resistance. He knew it was coming. He just didn't know when. Inside, encrypted devices, documents, and digital signatures linking him to 2 major international shipments. Evidence that couldn't be explained away. Evidence that couldn't be buried. 3 charges filed immediately. Importation of methamphetamine, importation of cocaine, participation in an organized criminal group. No bail, no statements, no press conference, because this wasn't just another arrest. This was the final domino. He was the last remaining Comanchero leader in New Zealand, the last strategist, the last ghost. And when he fell, the entire syndicate crumbled behind him. April 9, 2025, Auckland District Court. No cameras, no press, no defense. The charges were read. He said nothing. As of today, no trial date has been set, but the silence isn't accidental. This case is part of a sprawling international investigation, a web that includes cartel suppliers, corporate enablers, and professional money launderers. One of them, Andrew Simpson, a lawyer who allegedly created the trust structures that masked the gang's wealth. The vice-president remains in custody. The syndicate he built no longer exists. Pasilika Nauafahu sits in a prison cell, denied parole twice. Earliest release, July 2028. The Christchurch chapter, wiped out. Auckland leadership, destroyed. Active Comanchero operations in New Zealand, 0. What started as a bold expansion became a ticking time bomb, because in the end, their own design made them impossible to hide. Ambition outpaced stability, and once the world saw them clearly, it was only a matter of time. The Comancheros believed in shadows, in silence, in the myth that crossing borders meant escaping consequences. They were wrong. What they didn't count on was coordination. New Zealand and Australian agencies didn't just share information, they shared intent. Over 5 years, they quietly mapped every encrypted message, every financial front, every smuggling route, until there were no shadows left to hide in. The fall of the vice president wasn't just one man's end. It was proof that in today's connected world, every message can be decrypted, every asset can be traced, every ghost eventually leaves footprints. And as the vice president fell, another name echoed in international briefings. Ngakuri, the Comanchero Supreme Commander, arrested in Turkey after years of orchestrating transnational deals. This wasn't just a New Zealand gang, it was a global machine, and every gear inside it has now stopped turning. What's left now is silence, but not the silence of control, not the silence of fear, the silence that follows when the story ends. In today's world, power is traceable, silence is temporary, and syndicates built on fear always collapse. If this deep dive into the fall of the Comanchero Vice-President showed you how global crime networks really operate, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. We tell the stories others won't touch, with truth, clarity, and no fear. Turn on notifications so you never miss a case that matters. And if you want to share your thoughts on this takedown, drop a comment below. We read every single one. Thanks for watching.